What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and we're continuing our coverage of the Warhammer 40k 10th edition Space Marine faction preview. We talked in the last video about Guilliman and all of the faction mechanics that are intersecting with his abilities. He has some incredible synergies with stratagems and faction abilities like Oaths of Moment that the Space Marine faction is going to be using, as well as the detachment rules for the Gladius Strike Force. And additionally, in that article were also included further looks at the composition of 40k datasheets in the new edition for Space Marine vehicles, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, I think the most exciting one for everyone is going to be the fan favorite vehicle, the Space Marine Land Raider. This thing has had an enormous glow up in the new edition, and I think most importantly with the inclusion of that assault rent mechanic, allowing units to charge after disembarking from the Land Raider. Now, one thing that we don't quite know yet is exactly how disembarking from transports works in the new edition. It's never been stated whether or not a unit can move after disembarking from a transport that has already moved in the turn. And while the implication is that they can't, there still is the possibility that they may be able to, giving units disembarking from the Land Raider a huge threat range. Already, it's most likely going to be the 10-inch move of the Land Raider, plus a 3-ish inch disembark, plus the charge that you'll actually get. So you're looking at somewhere around 18 to 20 inches most reasonably, assuming a 2d6 charge. But if you are also able to move on top of that, that's going to go absolutely through the roof. This is interesting because it gives Land Raiders a unique identity within Space Marine transport vehicles. And Land Raiders have always been kind of weird in that they were mostly a ranged support platform that could also kind of tangentially transport infantry. And if you ever needed to have those quad las cannons and the backline range support, and you also needed maybe something to protect your units, your shooting units in the first turn, sometimes you would consider a Land Raider, but you very rarely wanted both of those mechanics in the same transport. But now that Land Raider is going to be moving up the table, it's going to get in range with its shorter range weapons, and it's going to get good angles with its las cannons and its anti-tank weapons, but then it's also going to be delivering assault units directly into the fray. And I can certainly foresee extrapolating some of these mechanics out, how the other variants of Land Raiders like Redeemers and Crusaders are going to be super good. If we assume that those have their expanded transport capacity, Redeemers have, good torrent weapons, and Crusaders get maybe the twin-linked full rerolls on their Hurricane Bolters, all of these Land Raider variants are going to be eminently playable. But talking about the one that we have in front of us right now, this is the classic, I think it's called the Godhammer pattern, which is why it has Godhammer las cannons. The Godhammer las cannons actually have the same profile, basically, as the Ballistus Dreadnoughts las cannon, coming in at strength 12, AP 3, D6 plus 1 damage. Bit of an odd damage characteristic. That D6 plus 1 is a little bit idiosyncratic, but it's a little bit more consistent than the flat D6 that we saw previously. Important to note, it is a flat 2 attacks. It's not a single attack twin linked, so instead of getting rerolls, it's just going to get double shots, and that is a big deal. Now, obviously, we can also take a Hunter-Killer Missile on this thing. We've seen the profile for that previously at that huge strength of 14, but a little bit less damage than the las cannons. The Multi-Melta profile is also not that new. While their damage is still good, their relative strength compared to the toughness value of most vehicles in the game has been dramatically reduced, and so they're going to be a lot less effective as anti-tank weapons. They also went down to 18-inch range, which means their Melta ability will only trigger at 9 inches, not 12 inches, which is a big downgrade as well. I definitely think that las cannons have now finally supplanted multi-meltas as the premier anti-tank of the game. Multi-meltas are going to be fine, but they're a little bit low strength, a little bit low range for being consistent anti-tank. If I were to put my tinfoil hat on, I would say that the 9th edition multi-melta buffs made multi-meltas incredibly in demand, and so everyone put multi-meltas on their Devastators and stuff, and now they're going to be tearing them off for las cannons. Were I to engage in conspiracy theories, I would say that was calculated, but it might just be that las cannons really needed a glow up. Who knows? Now, the most interesting weapon profile on this thing, in my opinion, is going to be the Twin Heavy Bolter, which is sounds a little bit funny, but it's a 3-attack weapon at the normal heavy bolter profile that we've been used to for the whole edition. Strength 5, AP 1, 2 damage, but comes with the sustained hits and twin-linked keywords. So not only does it get rerolls to wound, and the more I think about it, actually, the less effective that seems like it is in Space Marines, because you're already getting wound rerolls from your Oaths of Moment, which the Land Raider does have, as we can see on its datasheet. So it's going to get full rerolls against that Oaths of Moment target. So you're not always going to be benefiting from the the twin-linked weapon ability, but it's nice to have, I guess. However, having sustained hits is a pretty big deal. And I think this is kind of a consolation prize for shooting at the Oaths of Moment target, because obviously Twin Link doesn't do anything if you're firing at your Oaths of Moment target, but getting hit rerolls makes sustained hits, which is additional hits on critical hits, so hit rolls of 6, that much more effective, because you get twice as many or 30% more, depending on what dice you're rerolling, chances to trigger those additional hits. Now, I think a real important question is going to be whether or not this is a heavy bolter mechanic or specifically for the twin-linked heavy bolter variety. And if sustained hits is a mechanic of the heavy bolter itself, and we see some efficient heavy bolter platforms in the Space Marine army, especially when combined with those Oath of Moment rerolls, heavy bolters look like they're going to be insanely strong. Getting that additional exploding hits plus full wound rerolls on a relatively high volume weapon is huge, and heavy bolters may be a premier weapon going on into the new edition. So that's super cool to see, but we'll just have to see whether or not it impacts all heavy bolters or just the one on the Land Raider. In addition to that, we also see some core abilities that we have expected. It has the Deadly Demise D6 ability, so it explodes for D6 mortal wounds on a roll of a 6. It also has the damaged attribute, so at 5 wounds remaining or less, it's going to suffer -1 to hit. Obviously, the new bracketing mechanic that heavy vehicles will have in the new edition. Much less impactful bracketing than previously. These Land Raiders are always going to be at top speed. They're never going to go below hitting on 4s. And again, with access to all these rerolls, even hitting on 4s with rerolls against your Oath of Moment target, they're still going to be very effective. I also imagine you'll have Tech Marines and things like that that will have the ability to buff them and repair them. So I don't think that this damaged attribute is really going to affect the Land Raider too much. Now, I think the coolest thing to see is the front side of the datasheet, which we have actually literally not seen in the entirety of the edition so far. So you finally get confirmation that the front side of the datasheet card has the war gear options and unit composition on it. Within this single card readout, the front of the card has your list construction restrictions. It tells you how many models are in a unit, what they're armed with, what their weapon options are. Then you just flip it over when you're playing the game, and all of the weapons and the statistics and mechanics of all of those options that you've selected are on the back edge. It seems so easy. I love this datasheet layout, and I assume that there's going to be even some other mechanics that can be put on the front of the card to further differentiate units. We already see the transport restrictions are on the front of the datasheet as well. So we could also see things like, unit restrictions, like Space Marine captains, you can only take one of potentially at a detachment or something like that. Those could also be on the front end of the datasheet, so they don't have to clutter the back end of the datasheet with tons of additional abilities that actually aren't relevant to you once you're playing a game. Now, obviously, we don't have points values yet for the unit or the options either, but we do have confirmation that those are going to be in a PDF document in the future. Now, in addition to the Land Raider datasheet being fully revealed, we also see a couple weapon profiles being revealed. The first one being the Heavy Onslaught Gatling Cannon. This thing is coming in at its classic 12 attacks at a 3+ ballistic skill, strength 6, however AP 0, which a lot of things are moving to with the new AP reduction that we've been finding in this new edition. That said, it does have the devastating wounds characteristic, so wound rolls of 6 automatically inflict mortal wounds instead of normal damage. It basically bypasses all armor with its wound rolls of 6. It gets better the more heavily armored your target is. So it means that the Heavy Onslaught Gatling Cannon is good at both shooting at light infantry that it can sweep away with that AP 0, and shooting at vehicles where it can chip 2 to 3 mortal wounds in every time it fires at it, which I think makes it a pretty good all-rounder weapon. It's obviously much better against low armor units, but it's fine against the heavy vehicles. And the other thing I like is that this mechanic, this devastating wounds mechanic, has already been associated with assault cannons. And this means that Games Workshop is doing a lot of work to unify weapon families. So we've seen so far that basically every las cannon has that D6 + 1 damage value. Every melta weapon has the melta characteristic. Every rotary cannon, like the Gatling cannons or assault cannons, have this devastating wounds mechanic. And that helps a lot, not only with differentiating the different kinds of weapons, but also just the cognitive load of remembering what they do. If you look at a thing with a big spinny gun, then you know that it probably has devastating wounds on it. Just like you look at a melta gun with the heat nozzle and you know that it probably gets extra damage at close range. I love this. Assault cannons in the previous edition were just kind of a weapon that shot a lot, so giving them their own unique mechanic definitely helps make them more unique than they were. And it is also representative of their old rending mechanic, so it also calls back to legacy mechanics, which is super cool too. Now, of these weapon reveals, the most incredible one is the heavy laser destroyer off of the Repulsor Executioner. Now, we've already seen the heavy onslaught Gatling cannon, which the Repulsor Executioner has on that turret-mounted weapon right next to, coaxial with, the heavy laser destroyer, but now we see the profile for the heavy laser destroyer. Now, the aquiline optics on the Repulsor Executioner has always had a different effect every edition that it's been out, to my knowledge, so we don't exactly know in full what this weapon's going to do. In 9th edition, it got +1 to hit with that weapon. In 8th edition, if it moved slowly enough, it got to double fire that weapon. And we don't know if any of those mechanics are carrying over. So keep in mind that this weapon profile that we're seeing right here may not be representative of exactly how much damage the weapon does currently. Now, I made a video in the past talking about how defensively oriented the profiles in 10th edition look like they're going to be, and whether or not we'll see offensive profiles to match. And while we are seeing a little bit higher of a strength characteristic on weapons like the Hunter Killer and the Las Cannon, the Heavy Laser Destroyer is really knocking them out of the park with the massive anti-vehicle damage that it does. This weapon is coming in at 2 attacks at strength 16, AP4, D6 plus 4 damage. This means that while it's hitting on 3s and wounding on 3s against a lot of the sort of mid-rate vehicles in the game that are going to be somewhere around toughness 9, there's a non-zero chance that if it converts a single one of them, it's going to one-shot that vehicle by rolling a 6 to do damage. There's a very reasonable chance, and in fact, it is literally impossible for it to fail to kill a 10-wound vehicle if it does convert both of its laser destroyer attacks. Now, in addition to that, we can also assume that the Repulsor Executioner is going to have a lot of additional weaponry. These things are kitted out usually with 3 heavy stubbers. They have that heavy onslaught Gatling cannon. They have heavy bolters hull mounted. And if those are getting the same mechanics that the Land Raider ones are getting, you're getting exploding hits on those as well. You're getting devastating wounds on the onslaught Gatling cannon, and you're getting full rerolls potentially from Oaths of Moment, depending on what you're shooting at. I think we're moving into a tank-focused game. So it seems like a lot of armies are going to be rocking transports and at least some T9 vehicles and stuff, and you're going to have to bring answers to those, and it feels like the Repulsor Executioners are being set up as being the premier anti-tank tool, at least in the Space Marine arsenal. I think that's great because Repulsor Executioners are cool as hell. So if we were going to see the return of a tank-focused game, I'm glad to see that it looks like we're going to see these big, cool hover tanks back in the Space Marine faction. I'm not really looking forward to having them shoot at my guys because it looks like they're going to kill them super dead, but we'll have to see what other characteristics look like elsewhere in the game. It does look like while the defensive profiles are being increased, the offensive profiles are being increased proportionally, and if we see faction and mechanics like Oaths of Moment rolled into other armies in 40k as well, I think the lethality of the game is going to be slightly less than it was, but it's mostly just going to change form rather than be super survivable. Your units aren't going to tank infinitely. If your opponent brings the correct volume of anti-tank, they're going to be able to kill your big stuff basically regardless. Anyway, that's everything in this Space Marine preview article. The Warhammer community has indicated that they're going to be doing faction previews for the remainder of the week, every weekday, so get ready for some Tyranid previews coming at you very soon, which I am so stoked about. We've been seeing so many Space Marine mechanics recently, and all I want to see is what we're going to get to fight against Space Marines, because in a vacuum, it looks like Space Marines are incredible, but it may also be that other factions get equally powerful mechanics, so I'm super excited. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everyone who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All your people are great, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.